That's it.
So almost 12 years ago, we created a calculator that estimates the people, planet, and profit impact of telework. And in 2006, the General Accountability Office was asked by a couple of congressmen to figure out how the federal government could quantify teleworking government. They'd spent money on it. How can they find out how much they've saved? In particular, because the current administration was pulling back on telework, and they wanted to. I said 2006, 2016. And so they wanted some evidence, hey, if you're going to pull back on it, how are you going to recoup these savings? And I'll be talking about the calculator and using some of the numbers, but when GAO was done vetting it, they said that it was comprehensive and based on solid research, and said that it was for use throughout government. There's actually a bill right now, Congressman Connolly introduced recently to do just this, require more accountability for teleworking government. We also wrote a business case for the state of Washington, and from that they issued an executive order calling for flexible work for state employees. We just had a peer-reviewed book come out recently. We wrote the US chapter of an 11-country study of is all this telecommuting, is all of this working at home reducing our work-life balance? And so bottom line is people said no. In fact, it's helping. So, and the publisher just made that available free. It's a $135 book, so I haven't told my friends about it. But the publisher just made it available free because of COVID. So 3 things I want to focus on. The whole work from home, where is it? Where has it been? Where is it going? What that means to the future of work, how and where it's done. And then some politics of from state and federal related to making that grow. So like Jill said, we did a study along with a group called Iometrics, a company we partner with a lot, and the owner is a PhD and statistical genius. We got over 3,000 global respondents. And so it's one of the most robust studies that's been done since COVID. And what we were really looking for, we kind of come at this from a business real estate point of view. We were looking for, what's working, what isn't working, who's doing it, how much are they doing it, how much do they want to do it in the end, so that we could begin to estimate for clients, what is this going to mean to your real estate footprint? How are we going to work going forward? So that was just released on Thursday, and you're the second webinar with that'll have some of the results. I'm only going to touch on the results that I thought would be of interest to this group. The whole report, I think it's a 60-page report you can download from our website, Global Workplace Analytics/whitepapers, and I'll have a link at the end. It was a pretty representative study. We didn't do any survey weighting or anything, but when we looked at it compared to the Bureau of Labor Statistics data, it had a very similar demographics. We did cuts by generation, by the role in the company, so manager versus non-manager, leader, executive leader, those kinds of things. We parsed it by geography. I'm only going to show the US results right here. And we parsed it by geography. What was the other thing? Role, geography, generation, age, by age. And there were some interesting findings by age, but I probably won't talk about them either. So let's just talk about a little bit about where remote work was before COVID. Is that a question?
No, go ahead.
Yeah, we estimate based on, we went through the Bureau of Labor Statistics data a couple of years ago and estimated which jobs were compatible with at least some kind of remote work, and found that it was about 56% of the US jobs. And I think up in your area, it's a whole lot more. study after study shows that 80% of workers would like to work from home at least some of the time. Gallup work shows that about 43% of them say they do it at least occasionally, but only 3.6% of the US population works from home half time or more. That doesn't include the self-employed. So it's kind of been, you know, growing at about 10%, maybe in the last couple of years, 15% a year, but no great shakes. For some reason, my screen is frozen. In terms of who offers it, you'll hear, you know, 70% of companies offer remote work. And that number comes from the Society for Human Resource Management, that 42% offer it part-time, 27% offer it full-time. But the reality is that if you look at Bureau of Labor Statistics data, which has a kind of a strict criteria for whether or not a company offers remote work, they have to offer it to all or most of their employees. And it turns out that only 7% of companies do that. This is prior to COVID. So I've kind of referred to it as the 7% privilege over time. It's mostly been allowed for the prized employees, the older employees, the more tenured. In some areas, particularly in tech, it's a little bit broader. But there's just this huge mismatch between, you know, 80% of the workforce wants it, and only 7% of companies offer it to all or most. Then comes COVID. And overnight, everything changes. Something that we would have worked with a company for 6 months to a year to roll out and to prepare leadership and managers and employees, suddenly they're thrown into the deep end. So before COVID, and this is from the survey that we just did, before COVID, 31% of people say they were working from home 1 day a week or more. During COVID, that number goes to 88%. And this is office workers, so this is not the entire workforce. The large majority of those, as you would suspect, 77% are working from home full-time right now. Again, from the survey, and this was kind of a surprise, because if you look back at those numbers, that means that more than 50% of people hadn't done this before on any kind of regular basis. And what we're finding is that the majority of them say that they're feeling very successful. There was something that happened. We were doing webinars and interactive Zooms early on in the COVID crisis. And at that point, I'm certain they would not have said this. They were not feeling productive. They didn't know how to use the tools. They didn't know how to collaborate and communicate. But in a very short period of time, they've become successful. 77% say they're fully productive at home. And even right now, when, you know, the cacophony of having children at home, struggling with broadband issues, not knowing how to use the technology, not having the proper equipment and so forth, the respondents said pretty much they weren't having any technical issues or technology issues. It's no worse than the office anyway. But the really surprising thing was that they're saying that they lose 78 minutes a day when they're at the office and 43 minutes a day to interruptions when they're home. So even right now, with, you know, all that's going on, they're showing remarkable resilience. And I mean, that's a number I would have expected to see, or I have seen in the past, you know, in normal times. 71%, 72% are saying that they're feeling successful and productive, managers compared to employees. So managers are buying in. They're mostly satisfied with the kinds of things that involve solo work at home. So thinking and concentrating and getting work done, and even creativity and innovation. A lot of the criticisms of remote work over the years have been that, oh, you can't innovate when you're alone. And actually, the science shows that it, in fact, takes alone time to spur innovation. There's two parts to the innovation process, and we're most creative when we're alone. We're most innovative when we're together. But the collaboration, although people say they're just as successful at collaborating remotely and collaborating virtually, they lose something in the kind of teamwork for when they're working virtually. So, you know, we're seeing 86% say that they're very successful, they're satisfied with their performance in collaborating with their teams at the office. I'm on the third graph over, and 60% at home. They're still doing it okay. They're still productive in those things, but it's just not as satisfying for them. And kind of the good news there is that that's something that can be taught, and that time will help. So the longer they work at home, the better they'll become at it. That last graph is something that we would have expected. Managers need to better understand how to manage people remotely. I mean, we're still managing with techniques of the days of sweatshops and typing pools. You know, seeing the back of their head tells us that they're working. So we've got to outgrow that. We've got to learn to manage by results, because anything else is just babysitting. And I'm seeing a lot of technology coming out of Silicon Valley that is going to allow companies to virtually babysit. You know, watching keystrokes, persistent video, watching what programs you're using, measuring your productivity by what programs and what keystrokes and what screens it grabs over the day. I mean, it's really scary stuff, because the office slackers are going to be the slackers at home. And the only way to know whether people are working, whether they're home at the office, is to manage them by results. But again, those are things that we can train. And that's the kind of thing that we typically do train when a company's rolling out this program. There was some interesting data around the age and the size companies. So the most successful working from home are the larger companies. Over 2,500 and over 25,000 were about the same, 74% feeling successful. And the lowest was those middle companies. So I think what's happening there is that the very smallest companies are kind of scrappy, and, you know, they could figure anything out. They're used to working remotely.
And let me jump in here, Kate, with a few questions for you.
Yeah.
A lot of people would like to know more about the survey respondents, like what kind of a little bit more about who the sample was. And some are asking that one, Aaron is saying, as someone who works at office and home, the stat about distractions at work home seems way off to me. Are these responders married with kids? And someone else wants to know, when was the sample taken? Were we already in lockdown?
Okay, good questions. Yes. The sample was fielded on March 30th and closed on April 24th. So it was really, you know, kind of right as the US got into this. And that's one of the things that surprises me about those interruptions. You know, we heard anecdotally from a lot of people that they were having real problems being at home with the children, and, you know, the lack of bandwidth and those kinds of things. But if you look at the demographics in terms of the age, again, it very much matches the US workforce. It also matches any research that we've done in the past, including companies that have actually measured their pre and post performance using remote work. We consistently see that the interruptions at the office are much more extensive. And I mean, home has kind of become the place for concentration, and the office the place for collaboration. Now that's going to change when we go back, because it's kind of hard to collaborate from 6 feet away, if you believe the 6 feet number, with a mask on. But I'll talk about that more in a bit. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think there are two or three people who are fascinated by how you got the sampling and all these details about
Mhm.
how you found people and stuff. And I think that's of less interest than the actual findings. But at the end, could you give a little description of how you found all these people and how, kind of some of the science of it? There's two or three people who are really into that, but I don't think that's the main issue that people want to hear about. So if you could do that at the end, that'd be great.
Yeah, if you'll remind me.
Yeah.
But I mean, just very quickly, we started with a group called the International Facilities Management Association. I belong to a group called the Workplace Evolutionaries. And we're focused on the future of work. And we went to IFMA with 25,000 members and asked them to send the survey. They brought in two other large associations that also sent the survey. We sent it, and then the rest was social media. So it was about a half and half from the cooperation of those organizations and social media. We find, and this is consistent with everything else we've ever seen, that people tend to give back about half of the time they would have otherwise spent commuting. So, you pad into the office, into the kitchen, you get your cup of coffee, you go into wherever you're going to work, your office or the dining room table or whatever, and you tend to just sit down and work. In fact, overworking is the biggest problem that managers have to deal with people working from home. It's just without all those social cues of people getting up at the end of the day and leaving their desk, it's sometimes very hard to turn it off, as I can attest to. And my husband would agree. I think I mentioned this before that, of course, employees would say that we're very productive, but what do the managers think? And we did parse that information, and it was really no different than what employees felt. So in terms of who wants to, 76% want to continue working from home after COVID. A huge number, again, given that half of these people had never done it before. And with all that's going on, one of our fears in all of this was that it was going to be a lousy experiment because they were sent home without the technology, without the tools, without the training, all of the stuff going on at home, all of the trauma of COVID, social distancing, that it was just, everybody was going to say, oh, I can't wait to get back to the office. I think there is going to be a certain amount of, it's fun to go to places for a while where people talk in full sentences rather than your 3-year-old or your 4-year-old. But from everything we're seeing, and there have been, 5 or 6 other surveys fielded at about the same time, this number is consistent. In the 70 to 80% of people wanting to continue.
Do you think that policymakers have a clue about this? I mean, they've been fighting telecommuting for years. Do they understand that that number's been consistent and is coming out again during COVID?
They're very much behind the curve, and I'll talk about at the end the very many ways that things that need to change in order to make this successful, because there's a lot of inhibitors.
Great.
So, everybody's, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I just said that's great.
So everybody's asking the question, will the offices go the way of the dodo? What's going to happen to commercial real estate? Well, it turns out that, even from the very beginning, back in, not the very beginning, but early in April and just a couple of weeks ago, there was talk about, what's going to happen, that we're going to actually be de-densifying offices after a period of cramming people together in these open offices and cutting down the square footage per person. We're now going to go back into a period of actually expanding that. And turns out that the sweet spot is about 2.5 days a week. So everybody likes to kind of make this conversation polar. Oh, we're never going to see our employees, or everybody has to come to the office. And the fact is that half-time spot is, as I said, the sweet spot for both employees and employers, maybe not for the environment. So for employees, you know, it gives them their social time. One of the downsides of working from home, and one of the things that crops up with companies that have been doing this the longest, is this kind of fall away from culture. You know, not having the esprit de corps of the group, being lonely. We polled about that too, and that very much polled toward the younger population being the ones that were struggling most with not being in the office. You know, part of that may be because they're also the ones that probably don't have a large home or a separate room where they can work. And so, you know, we did a correlation between what are the success factors of working from home. And one of the big ones is having a proper place to do it. So 2.5 days a week is the sweet spot for people. For the employer, it starts to give them the opportunity to reduce their real estate costs. So if somebody's working from home 1 day a week, you know, there's not much they can do about, you know, they still need a place to go those other 4 days a week. The company really can't reduce its office footprint. When you start to get to 2 and 3 days a week, then you can start to look at unassigned desks, which is a place we've been moving for a number of years. Some, you know, huge companies, Fortune 500 companies, have been moving to this, where, you know, not even the CEO has an assigned seat. Everybody comes in and works in an area that is appropriate for them. In fact, in the Netherlands, there's a group called, building called The Edge, and a few years ago, I think it may still be the smartest building in the world, also the most sustainable building in the world. It's Deloitte's headquarters. And there, the parking lot recognizes your car and takes you to a parking spot that's near a space inside the office that is that would be best for you given the work that you want to do because of what's on your calendar. So it knows that. So it then haptically directs you to the office, you know, taps you and gets you to that office, sets the chair, sets the sound, sets the light to your preference because it knows who you are. The coffee machine makes the coffee the way you like it. You know, it taps you on the wrist when it's time you've been sitting too long, or when it's time to go to another meeting. It orders the Uber. I mean, all that sounds very Big Brother. Personally, I would love it, but I mean, that's really where things are going with the smart buildings. And so the next question then is 2.5 days a week, is it still going to be that 7% privilege? I mean, people may want it, but are employers going to allow it? And so I think that there's 5 factors that are going to drive it forward in a significant way as a result of COVID. And I'll go through them individually. So for employees, the genie's out of the bottle. They've spoken via our survey and a number of surveys. They want to continue to work from home. They recognize that there are some life-work conflicts associated with it, but the work-life benefits override those. Being able to, you know, be at home, avoid the commute is a huge one, avoid the stress, have more time for exercise, eat better. Again, all of those things came out in the survey. From a manager's point of view, the biggest holdback for the last 30 years to remote work has been that middle managers don't trust their people to work untethered. I mean, you know, that's really the bottom line. And again, it goes to that not managing by results. But the biggest difference between managers that support it and managers that don't are the ones that have done it. So now we have managers, and we saw it in the polling, 70% feel that they're productive, just as productive. So now we're going to reduce that, what has been a primary barrier to remote work in the past, because now, and the longer this goes on, the more that's going to have an impact, because more and more managers will realize, hey, we're getting work done. And we're already hearing that from C-suites around the world saying, we're actually surprised that we're able to do this. And that leads me to the next one. So the C-suite's looking at all those buildings there that aren't occupied and probably laying awake at night thinking about all the money they're losing, and also thinking, you know, maybe we really don't need all that space. Now, it's going to take them a while to get out of leases, but, you know, obviously we're headed for an economic downturn or a recession. So during the last recession, the biggest driver of remote work was to reduce office space. So I think that's going to happen again. But also what they're seeing is that for the last, or since the recession, that it's a substantial driver of attraction and retention. And in a skills shortage, in a talent shortage, this has become a very important strategy. It's something they know employees want. And if they want to hire the best and the brightest from all over the world, they may not want to live in Silicon Valley. And so companies are understanding that. So the productivity, the attraction and retention, the disaster preparedness is going to be a huge driver. It also reduces absenteeism and turnover. And we estimate that a typical company can save about $11,000 per half-time remote worker per year. So already Gartner was saying like last month that 3/4 of CFOs said they will reduce their space as part of this. And some of the projects that we've been seeing and have been going on for years in terms of like building new headquarters, companies are saying, no, we're going to wait on that. So, it is happening. I already spoke to this one. The fourth factor I think that's going to increase the uptake is investors. So companies got caught with their pants down here. I mean, they were not prepared for a disaster. They were not prepared to have their people work remotely. And that's important to investors. And in the future, I think we'll see right up there next to the numbers in the financial report, the disaster preparedness plan. And huge part of that for the last 30 years for companies and governments has been the ability for people to work remotely. Risk managers also, by the way, have now become a whole lot more important in the organization, and they typically report to the CFO. So, they're going to have a larger say in all of this. And then there's the sustainability issue, and I hope this is not just a hope. I hope it's a reality. But when in a very short period of time, we can actually see the difference in the air and water quality, it's really hard to deny that taking cars off the road is a sustainability strategy. I recycle, but you don't really feel it. In this case, we really feel it, and we can really see it. And I think both from the employee point of view, particularly younger workers are very worried about the company's sustainability record. Investors are getting more and more concerned about it, and only investing in companies that are doing the right thing by people, planet, and profit. And so we estimated, based on 100 employees, that calculator that I told you that we use, working from home half of the time, what they say they want to. For every 100 employees, a company can reduce its commuter miles by 154,000 a year, 8,000 trips, and 70 tons of greenhouse gases. There are people that will say no, because induced travel, once the traffic stops, it's going to pick up again, because now the people who weren't taking that highway are going to, because it's not as congested. And it's a small part of the TDM, transportation demand management community, that's saying that. And we actually take into account that we only factor that people will reduce their driving by 75%, not 100%, because it's, you can't just take the kids to school on the days that you go to work. There are going to be additional trips, things you would have done going to and from the office.
Kate, one question that people are asking throughout, and I think you were clear on this at the top, but this is a survey of white collar and office workers, and not of blue collar or people who have to be around machinery and so on. Uh-oh, where's that music coming from? Anyway, I just wanted to reiterate, you did not sample working class or blue collar, that sort of thing, but there are some studies out there showing, of course, that's a much tougher situation. They have to be at work.
Yeah, I mean, it's polar. The remote work has for a very long time been the for the upper income, although there's an element of some of the minimum wage, also contact centers, customer service centers more than 10 years ago moved to the remote work model. And there are areas in the country that are actually encouraging, that are actually training their population. So in places like where steel has disappeared or the coal industry has disappeared, the economic development people are training people to be good remote workers so that they can bring jobs, better paying jobs into their communities. We didn't intentionally omit blue collar workers. It's just that the sample, how we got the sample through the associations, begs to the professionals. So it really is a triple bottom line opportunity. I ran the numbers for San Francisco here, assuming that 56% of the 2.1 million workers could work from home. Again, I think it's a lot higher in San Francisco. That's the national average, and 80% want to.
Could you blow up those numbers? They're tiny.
I don't know.
Can you like stretch your screen out at all?
No, because I'm in presenter mode.
Oh, okay. Well, you're gonna some of these slides will be public, right? So people can grab them.
Yes, I'll make this the whole presentation public. This is also from a calculator that you can use for free on our website. And so on the left-hand side, if you can't see it, we have our estimates for increase in productivity, reduction in office space, reduction in absenteeism, and reduction in voluntary turnover. We have a database of over 5,000 documents that we've collected over the years. You know, anything we could put our eyeballs on that is good research on remote work, data around remote work, what makes workers successful. And those numbers are conservative numbers based on those, looking at all of the studies that we've seen and some of our own clients as well. And then on the right-hand side, it shows the employer impact of being, in your area, a reduction of 17,000 per half-time telecommuter per year. I said 11,000 earlier, but that was based on national averages. And when I looked at the average dollars per square foot for real estate and the average salary in your areas, it really bumped that number up. For employees, typically they can save between $2,500 and $4,000 a year. But again, that is the national average. I didn't have the numbers to run in your area, and I would suspect that they're much higher.
Just want to interrupt real quickly here. Kate, we've got 100 participants, and they're from all over California. So some of the board members are in San Francisco, some are in South LA, some are in San Luis Obispo, but the crowd you're talking to is statewide.
Oh, okay. All right. So, you know, somewhere between that $11,000 per half-time telecommuter and the $17,000 is what a typical company could expect to save. And we have documented companies that have that level of savings and more. Employees can save money, and obviously it's good for the environment. So our estimate has been from about 4 weeks ago that within a year of the end of COVID, we'll see about 25 to 30% of the workforce of the professional workforce working from home multiple days a week. And that's starting to feel a little low. I felt kind of brave when I first did it, and I had a very scientific method of coming up with it, but it's starting to sound low. So finally, I want to talk about some of the politics of all of this. And by that, I mean kind of regulations and that kind of thing. Congressman Connolly, as I mentioned, standing to the second to the left, and I'm the third one, has introduced the Telework Metrics and Cost Saving Act. We did an analysis of what the government could save. This relates to federal employees. And as I said, in fact, a week before the shelter in place, they had brought back 12,000 Social Security workers, told them they couldn't telework anymore. And that had been, the administration had been pulling back teleworkers for the last several years. And so Congressman Connolly and a number of others said, look, you're gonna have to show us how it is that you're saving money by doing this. in terms of California, we were one of the leaders in this. I mean, all the way back to 1990, there was a pilot, and Jack Nillis invented the term telecommuting and telework. It was originally the telecommunications and transportation trade-off, which did not roll off the tongue very easily. And so he was involved in doing a pilot, issued a report, still available online. It was very successful. People were productive, but something changed since then, and the state government has not been in favor of telework. The transportation demand management, I've heard from a number of councils of government around the state. I'm working with the counties of Riverside and San Bernardino to try to use this as an opportunity to keep people off the roads. So teaching companies how and why they should be encouraging remote work. But we've been very slow in doing that. I've gotten no traction with SANDAG, or San Diego Council of Governments, and government agencies that I've talked to in California. So, I think we have another opportunity to use some of the TDM monies and Rule 2202, which is companies that have to report their greenhouse gases that are over 250 employees. So kind of using that as a leverage to create programs that reduce traffic and continue the remote work. So I think that's something that we really need to support and really need to look into. It's always been sort of the ugly stepchild of TDM. In terms of labor laws nationally and in the state, it's a rat's nest working from home. And this is perhaps why companies have not sort of stood up and said, hey, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, and we're going to make it formal, and we're going to make it available to all our employees, because there are lots of DOL and workers' comp and other issues that come up. Like, for example, if in many states, tax laws as well, in many states, if you have I'm an employee in New York, and my employer is in New York, and I'm working in New Jersey for one day or even less, I owe taxes in both states. So how's a company supposed to keep track of where their people actually are, short of the kind of surveillance that nobody wants to have happen? It's just very antiquated. DOL issues like overtime. For example, if you've got somebody in California, then you've got one set of overtime rules. And if you've got somebody in Nevada, you've got another set that you have to deal with. Workers' comp, California is stricter than most states in terms of workers' comp. And then there's the employee versus contractor. So I might be fat, dumb, and happy in Nevada with my contractor, but now if they're working at home in California, I could suddenly be in trouble. And I talked about the nexus having that's a little bit different. Having a presence in a state can then subject a company to sales tax that they otherwise wouldn't have to collect, because now they have a physical location. This goes back to the whole sort of Amazon issue of not charging sales tax. And again, I think the sustainability laws, I think we can use them to our advantage. So requiring companies to show their carbon footprint, making it less than, even for less than 250 employees, imposing fines, making it more visible that you can use commuter travel, scope 3 travel, to comply with some of the sustainability laws. And I guess that was the end of it. So I wanted to share with you, that's the where you can download the white paper. It's full of information that I didn't talk about, that I just didn't think this group would be interested in. So at that point, I'd like to open it up to you.
Go ahead and switch back to your, get rid of your slide there.
Mm-hmm. Okie dokie.